Thank you all for joining us for this webcast, which is brought to you by the Knowledge Translation for Employment Research Center, or the CATER Center, which is housed at the American Institutes for Research and is funded by the National Institute for Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDLR. I'm your host, Ann Outlaw. Before we get into the presentation, I'd like to go over some logistics for our listeners. You can find information, including a 508 PDF of the presentation slides, at our website at kter.org. Closed captioning is available by selecting the CC button at the bottom of your YouTube window. This is an on-demand webcast, so if you have any questions for our presenter today, you can email me at aoutlaw@air.org, and we'll convey your message to our guest. You can also ask your questions in the evaluation form, which I'll provide at the end of today's webcast. At the CATER Center, we organize webcasts on topics that are most pertinent to NIDLR employment grantees. And in the last survey of knowledge translation needs of these grantees, we saw that using social media is one of the top cited areas where employment researchers want to know more about. Today, we'll hear from Dr. Damian Rowland about how social media can be useful to you, or is your learning network fit for purpose? Dr. Damian Rowland is an experienced pediatric emergency medicine clinician coming to us from Leicester, England. He has considerable experience in the development of educational resources and their evaluation, especially in e-health technologies, which have applicability in specialties outside of pediatrics. We found out about his work through an article titled Social Media, Health Policy, and Knowledge Translation, which is also hyperlinked on the CATER website. He has a strong interest in social media as a means of knowledge translation using his Twitter account and his blog. Dr. Rowland, thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries at all, and thank you very much for the invite. I'm honored.
We're so pleased to have you. Let's begin.
Excellent. So this presentation is entitled How Can Social Media Be Useful to You? But I've prefaced it with, or is your learning network fit for purpose? And the reasons for that will become clear as I work through the presentation. I've been interested in social media for quite a while now, at least the last 5 years. And I've been involved in a number of communities of practice. And this is where I think social media has its biggest power. So contrary to popular belief, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about individual platforms. I'm not actually going to spend a lot of time talking about social media itself. What I'm going to talk about is how we translate knowledge and actually how social media platforms can help us do that. Because that's not just relevant to me in my life as a pediatric emergency medicine clinician. I think it is relevant to everyone in the 21st century. And the first thing to say is that I suspect the only disclaimer I've got is that I'm a social media editor for a journal. It's called Pediatric Research. I'm not sure that really kind of impinges on my qualifications to do this lecture, but I thought I'd let you know about it. But I will say that I use Twitter, and I use it a lot, and it's my primary social media platform. Many others are available. I often tell delegates at conferences I go to or other workshops I do on social media that if anyone ever stands up and tells you, well, to be good at social media, you must use this, you must use Twitter, you must use Facebook, I'd tell them to stand up and just walk out, because that speaker doesn't know what they're talking about. There is no one thing that you must do. I think you need to work out for yourself how you best integrate yourself in social media, and by that I mean plural. I just happen to use Twitter, a bit of YouTube and some other modalities, but there's lots of different ways of doing this. And what I'm going to try and concentrate on this talk is the fundamental theory, rather than go into fine detail about the different kind of social media platforms. And I'd like to start this story actually quite a while ago. So this is a picture. It's a faked picture, actually. This is a demonstration of an event that occurred back in 1846 on October the 16th, and it's Massachusetts General Hospital. And what's happening here is basically the first successful use of an anesthetic. Now, you can imagine back in 1846, there's no such thing as email, there's no such thing as the internet. But this initial operation was so successful that word spread about it rapidly. And actually, within a couple of weeks of the publication coming out, the specialty of anesthetics was being formed, and surgeons were starting to use this practice extremely widely within even a couple of years or so. And that degree of spread of information is quite phenomenal, given the challenges of communication they had. Now, the biggest driver for the anaesthetic had nothing to do with patient care. It was all to do with the fact that actually, if your patient survived the operation, they were more likely to be able to pay you for having done it. So that's the that's why anaesthetics was so important. But it spread because it was a fundamentally good process. And I put this slide in as a reminder that if you are doing things well, and regardless of your sphere of practice or whatever your context is, good things work and they will travel fast. And you don't need social media to do that for you. So social media is an additional mechanism, I suppose, of spreading knowledge and reaching people. It is not the only mechanism. And please don't go away from this talk thinking that this is the only thing you can do. And I just want to use this as an example. In a time well before social media, great ideas spread, and they're always going to be able to do that without social media. Having said that, it's quite true that there may well have been advances in our time which would have happened much more quickly had we been able to disseminate ideas in the way that we do at the moment. And almost instantly, when a celebrity or a politician tweets something either controversial or that is amusing, it can spread around the world literally in a matter of minutes. And for that reason, there is a bit of an imbalance or a bit of a challenge emerging. So I have a lot of people come up to me and go, Damien, you spend so much time on social media, kind of aren't you wasting your time? Isn't it just lots of people kind of talking about each other or making snarky comments? And I think it's a real shame that lots of people's perception of social media comes from the news or from celebrities, and they get a very warped view of what people are doing. And I'm not going to be able to change that particular perception. I think you're going to have to make up your own mind. What I would say is that there is an amazing amount of good stuff that happens that isn't going to reach the news, that you're not going to hear about on the 10 o'clock news. But that doesn't mean that you should give up on it because all you hear about social media is bad. There is a balance in all things. So just to give you an example of some of the power of this stuff, a bit of a challenge. So think about the last paper or report or anything that's published in your field that's really relevant to you. And think about which of your responses you're it's more aligned to what your thought process is. So is it that you have no idea what's going on in your particular workplace that might impact on you? You kind of remember something being released by email a couple of months ago but can't find it anymore, that you've read about it maybe from a colleague or on a blog. You don't quite understand everything about it, but at least you're aware. Or basically you're the type of person that if anything new comes out in your sphere of practice, you know about it instantly. So is that A, B, C, or D? So I'll just have a bit of a think about that. Okay, so you've read a great paper, report, presentation. You were thinking, this is going to be so impactful in my practice. I want to kind of share this with colleagues. I want to put it around our office. I want to be able to use it with the clients that I deal with. But you just can't remember where it is. So what do you do? you kind of scribble it down and hope that it'll come back to you? Do you spend a lot of time trying to Google it, trying to remember some of the key words? Do you go to a librarian or an information manager or an information technology and try and search for it formally? Or do you ask your online community of practice? So again, are you an A person, a B person, a C person, or a D person? Okay, and final question. Essentially, you've just been told you've written this report or a manifesto, or you've developed a new innovation that you're spreading, and you've been given the date for when that's going to come out. And this is the biggest thing that you've done so far. This is how you're going to kind of make your mark in your field of practice. So do you just pat yourself on the back and hope it's all going to go to plan? Do you let a few people know that you've been successful? Do you use Twitter to spread the news on the day? Or do you actually go around and talk to lots of people? Do you write a blog about it? You'll do a little podcast. You create an infographic, a picture describing what you're going to do, and maybe set up a bit of a Twitter journal club or a Twitter discussion about it. So again, A, B, C, or D. Okie dokie. So what I'm really asking you about is your digital network maturity. So if you were mostly A in these questions, I do think you probably do need to think about the mechanisms by which you're engaging people. If you were mostly Bs, you're pretty organized, but I don't think you're using tools effectively. And I think a lot of people would say that they're C, that you're aware that there are mechanisms out there for distributing knowledge, but perhaps you're not maximizing the potential of them. And if you're mostly D, congratulations, you're a digital learning network guru. And well done, and perhaps you don't even need to be on this talk because you know more about this than I do. So how do I have any credibility to talk about these concepts of digital learning and social media? Well, a lot of it came about because a while ago I wrote a journal article, and we were at a medical conference. It was an emergency medical conference, and we listened to speakers giving their talks, and we went to the speakers after they delivered their talk, and we showed those speakers the tweets that had been made about their talk. And we asked them a simple question. Does the tweet that was about your talk represent the message that you were trying to say? And we had about 10 to 15 speakers, and there were enough tweets about each of their talks to be able to feed something back to them. And it was quite interesting because about 80 to 85% of the time they said, yeah, that's really good. That's the message I wanted to get out there. But on a couple of occasions that there were things where the person was going, no, that's not my message at all. They've got that completely wrong. So it made us think about the importance of the way that kind of messages are spread. And we published that journal, and interestingly, it got picked up by Reuters, and it was a kind of a headline, Reuters Media kind of news press release for a while, and it ran with a headline, MD degree may not teach doctors how to tweet. Now that was not our message at all, but it seemed to latch on to a bit of public interest. And in terms of altmetrics, so that's a way of measuring the distribution of your article, it's one of my most successful to date, because it was an article about social media picked up by social media. But it's important that I raise my hand and say, social media is technically a hobby of mine. My primary interest is the academic care of children who are ill and injured. And I don't have any primary qualifications in social media. And I don't think there are many people who are professors of social media. So please take everything I say with a pinch of salt. This is my lived experience. So I'm imparting knowledge that I have learned because of the way that I found it successful for me. There is no right or wrong answer to this. Unlike mathematics or science, where there's a kind of 1 + 1 = 2, it doesn't quite work like that for social media. So one of the things that I am most passionate about is how we go from taking in my field of practice, which is published evidence or clinical guidelines on national policy, and I suspect there are similar things in the fields that you work in, that there will be some national guidance, there's a way of doing things, there's best practice, and that what those things, the things that we have defined as what works, how do we get that into the way that people work either in their normal working lives or how they deal with patients or clients? And what I've always talked about is there's this big gap between taking policy and guidelines and putting it into personal practice. And previously, and this is a medical context, but I think it works in all areas of life, is that knowledge comes from reading, i.e. books and journals. It comes from going to conferences or learning events or educational workshops. And unfortunately, a lot of it also comes with anecdote. We've always done it this way. The lead of the department says, this is the way we want to do it, so we're going to do it this way, even if that flies in the face of the way that evidence actually says it should be done. So books and conferences and anecdote are the way that knowledge are built up. And because of that, because of the way that we kind of learn, and sometimes it's not evidence-based, there's what I call a knowledge translation void. There's this gap in between getting what we should be doing into what we actually do. And conventionally, the way that we spread information is through very traditional channels. So the things I've spoken about, you have to read it in a book, you have to go to a conference or a workshop, or you just have to hope that you work in an institution that does things the right way. And what I'm interested in is a different way of being able to disseminate that knowledge, and that comes through collaborative learning networks. So that's large networks that go outside your workplace, but enable you to be linked into a wider distributed cohort of people who understand what is going on and can help you either personally with your own practice or help your organization improve the way that they get this evidence, guidelines and policy into the way that things should be. Now, it looks like this picture may not have come through, but the way that I am used to dealing with a community of practice or learning network is through the concept of free open access medical education. And that's FOAM. And it was actually developed by a guy called Mike Gadagan back in 2012. Mike Gadagan is an emergency doctor, but he was at a conference in Ireland, and he was in a pub, and all the best ideas come from pubs when you're socializing outside of work. And he was thinking about the amount of medical education that was released by people, not through their own organization, not by writing textbooks, but by sitting down at home and recording a podcast, or writing a blog, or having discussions with others and sharing it on Twitter. And he wanted to encapsulate that network of people. So he called it free open access medical education. And what he meant was it's a way of accessing knowledge which is free, you never have to pay for it. It's open access, everyone can see it, and it's medical education. It does what it says on the tin. And what he used to bring that together was a hashtag. And that hashtag was #FoamEd. Now, it couldn't be foam, because if you do #foam, there are amazingly lots of people who like to talk about foam. So we had to do foam education at the end. But this hashtag was used on Twitter to draw people together. Now, if you're not on Twitter, what I mean by a hashtag is that's a way of identifying a particular place marker. And what it means is that I don't need to follow everyone who's using the FoamEd hashtag. I can just put in the FoamEd hashtag, and anyone who's used that hashtag, I can see that particular line of conversation. So it allows you to partake in big networks without having to follow everyone in that particular network. Now, it's important to recognize that the concept of FOAM, free open access medical education, is not exactly the same as FOAMED, the hashtag. And an example of that is that I might do a social media posting about a journal article. or a policy paper or something like that. And I might credit that, or I might put a hashtag FOMED on it. And that will say to the FOMED community, this is of interest to you. But the article itself, for whatever reason, may be blocked. It may be paywall protected, etc. And so there's often been a bit of debate in the foam community about how we square that particular loop, that we've created this amazing network of people who like to get together under the concept of foam, but unfortunately some of the stuff under the FOMED hashtag isn't actually free. It directs you to stuff that you'd have to pay for. And so a group of people who were neonatologists, and they'd seen this explosion of information under this concept of foam and the FOMED hashtag. So they created their own hashtag, and they called it NEO-EBM. So it's Neonatology Evidence-Based Medicine. And they used that hashtag because they wanted to be able to have a placeholder that wasn't described what it said on the tin. These are tweets or blogs about evidence-based medicine in neonatology. And I was part of that initial group that started this. So this is a tweet from the 6th of May, 2018. And a group of us at a conference got together and we started using NEO-EBM as an umbrella term to bring everyone together. And it was amazing to see such a small group of people getting together, sticking a hashtag out there, which within a year had been used 10,000 times. And there's clearly between the 6 or 7 of us who started this, we've not tweeted that much. So we brought people into this large community. And just as an example of how this can work, you can see that the users started off in May 2018 at being 350. And then month after month after month, we brought in new users until almost within a year, there were about 1,000 monthly users using this hashtag NEO-EBM process of bringing people into this conversation. And just to say, it's interesting, if you look at number of tweets per day, it's not massive, but you can see spikes. And those spikes are when conferences occur, or there are big meetings when people are talking together at pace. But you can see that the underlying little trajectory is equal. It's not fading up. It's not getting massively bigger, but it's certainly still of interest a year after that hashtag was created. And the nice thing that you can do specifically with Twitter is look at the discussion. So a lot of people challenge, oh, you're just on Twitter talking about pictures of cats or dogs, but actually that's not the case. You can see infants, preterm birth, neonatal, studies, outcomes. So the discussions around this are true to the concept of neonatal evidence-based medicine. And I just shared that example of NEO-EBM because anyone who's listening to this particular kind of conference class today could think, okay, well, in my field of practice, I've got an interesting concept. You could create your own little hashtag, get a couple of colleagues together and just start tweeting around that hashtag and ask other people to join in. And there's no reason why you can't grow that community pretty quickly. We live in a world where actually our time is precious and organizations want us to know what we're doing. So that the slide at the moment represents something called NOCO, and NOCO stands for Network Object Engine Comparison and Observation. And it's an evidence-based way of being able to report the impact of your social media initiatives. And I've used healthcare social media, but it doesn't have to be directly in healthcare. And all it's saying is if you want to report what you do, you talk about your network, you can look at hashtags, you can look at sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is when you look at the positivity or negativity of a particular tweet. There's lots of engines, so Simpler, Sementrea are just a couple, but there are thousands more available that you can use to analyze tweets. You define your comparison and you look at observations. And so that this is a good method of feeding back to your workplace. Okay, we're going to use this social media strategy. We're going to create a community of practice around this hashtag. And what we will do is we will examine how we've done, and we can feed back and we can look at our progress after a month, after 3 months, after a year, in exactly the way that I've just demonstrated to you. Now, you've heard me use this term kind of digital communities of practice quite a lot now. What are digital communities? Well, this is a really funny thing because they shouldn't work. If you take an online community of which there is no hierarchy, there are no rules of engagement, there are no set principles, and there's actually no reason why people should continue to turn up. But there is something about the way that digital communities form or cluster around a particular shared purpose that makes them work, that makes this messy paint all come together into something beautiful. And this is something that I have a particular research interest. And so I looked at the FOMED hashtag over a couple of years. And there are a number of scientific principles about how you define a community of practice. And if you analyze the FOMED hashtag, you would find it shares all the properties of a true non-digital community of practice. So I think these things do exist, and they are quite powerful in being able to share knowledge. Now, if you're interested and you're kind of a real kind of academic or scientific person, it would be useful for you to explore the concept of rhizomes. So rhizomes, from a natural history point of view, are those roots under a tree that are very intermingled. There's no set pattern, but they provide a really strong network for a tree to keep itself rooted. And rhizomology is a particular theory that shows how you can have large communities that interact with each other, that work together, but without any obvious set rules. It's quite dense theory. I personally find it a little boring, but if you wanted to go away and read up on that, please do. My way of explaining it is through the 6 C's. So what I think happens is that I don't know how many people are listening to this particular presentation, but I only need one of you to get curious, one of you to go away and go, okay, well, yeah, I kind of see what he was saying, but I don't quite understand it. But I'm going to set up a Twitter account, or I'm going to go onto YouTube, or I'm going to try and set up with a few friends a digital community, and I'm going to look at what's out there. And that curiosity takes you away, and you start looking at stuff. And the more you look at stuff, you start curating it. So what I mean by that is you'll save a blog post, or you'll start saving some YouTube videos, or you'll start following different people on Twitter. And as you do that over weeks or months or so, you'll start going, actually, this is really interesting stuff. I've learned a lot here. And you start celebrating that. You will share it with others. You may retweet it, or you may talk about it in your workplace. And you'll celebrate that work with other people who are starting to get curious themselves, or other people who have been on the network for a while. And then that leads to collaboration. You may start working with other people that you've only ever met online to share a common purpose or try something a bit new with your clients. And that collaboration leads to new creation of new materials. Maybe you'll write your own blog. Maybe you'll do a YouTube video on how you tackled a difficult problem, and that creation leads to cultivation of a new network, a new kind of paradigm in the way that you can share information. And that's kind of how I see these things grow quite organically. So what am I talking about? I've given you nothing practical to hang your hat on. So let's start off. How do these communities show information? Well, I have a colleague, she's called Linda Dykes. She works in Wales, in the United Kingdom, and she has this idea of lavatory learning. CPD is continuing professional development. I think it's known in the US as CME. CPD while having a wee. So what she did is she came up with some learning points in medical practice, and she posted those on the back of a door in the toilets, and enable people to read some kind of short bites of information so they could take that away from them. And then she collated all those learning points in a website under this concept of lavatory learning CPD while having a wee. So it's just sharing knowledge both in your workplace, but also via our website, which, because of its kind of quaint title, attracted quite a bit of interest. Now, blogs are a really good way of sharing information. This is another UK blog. It's called St. Almond's. You don't need to understand the medicine here. What I'm trying to share though, is that on this blog, the doctors involved did little kind of case studies. They talked about patients they'd seen, obviously in a confidential manner, and they applied that back into the evidence. And you'll see on the right-hand side kind of different titles, and so people could go on click on those and learn a bit more. And it was presented in a very user-friendly style. The language was very accessible, and it just provided a way of people kind of chatting and getting together that was a little different from the normal mechanism of extracting information. And that was quite a popular way of doing things. Now, EM3 is East Midlands Emergency Medicine Educational Media. It's the name of a website that I'm part of where I work in Leicester in the UK. And we used to use our website to talk about some of the simulations that we've done in work. So in medical practice, we use simulated patients, these mannequins, so that we can practice in very stressful and highly complex situations without actually practicing on patients. And what we did was, while those simulations are really useful for the people there, if you weren't there, you were losing out on knowledge. So we used to write those simulations up and we put them in a simulation blog. Now, a non-medical example might be for that. It's you go to a workplace training day, and what you would do is you'd take some photos while you were there, you might record some key points, and then you'd write that up in a blog. Not a workshop summary, you don't want something dry. You want a really interactive account of how the individual who was there, what did they take away, what did they like, what didn't they like, and then you share that on a blog so that everyone gets to understand that information. And the advantage of being on a blog, it can be accessible to not only your target audience, but actually you will pull people in, and it's good advertising, it's good marketing. EM3 is now seen as a good place to be educated in the East Midlands, and that's where we are in the UK. So not only are we training our own staff and helping them, we're helping the recruitment to our own department. I run my own individual blog. To be honest, I've been quite busy, so that there aren't many recent blogs, but I used to do something called What I Learned This Week. And so every Friday I'd sit down and think, okay, what this week, I'll take a bit of reflection. What have I learned that might be useful for other people to think about? And I did this for a couple of years and amassed not an insignificant following. And I was getting up to kind of 35,000 hits a year on the blog. And I think it's just a really nice way of interacting with different audiences. And I would put out the blog, and then other people might share that, or they'd start a discussion with me online. And we created again this online community of practice of people who were quite willing to share personal experiences of the challenges that they sometimes had in work. And then this is a YouTube example. So for a period of time, what we used to do is if a guideline came out in our place of work, not only would we just send that out by email, a colleague and I would do a talk about it. It wouldn't last more than kind of 5 minutes or so, but we'd record ourselves on YouTube talking about that particular guideline, and we'd share that amongst our staff. And it's really interesting. So I was talking about that managing sepsis in children. That original YouTube video had 629 views. We don't have 600 staff, so other people outside of our department were finding this quite interesting. This kind of YouTube video now has over 1,500 views. Now, in the big scheme of things, that's not millions. I'm not saying this has gone massively viral, but it's had interest from other parties, and it's just another neat and nice way of sharing information. So what I'm looking forward to the future is a concept that I've termed with others digital scholars. And this can apply, this is not just a medical thing, this is in any sphere of life. And what you've got is, in a medical context, is critical clinicians, but outside of medicine, this criticality is in people who are interested in looking through the information that comes out on social media, and analysing it, reporting back on it, discussing new policies, discussing new evidence. They'll write individual blogs, they'll have discussions online, and they're just people who are digitally savvy and very happy to engage with others and discuss new information. And so this is a blog, it's called Boondocks. It's from a chap called Casey Parker, who's an Australian GP, and he does lots of articles about new publications in medicine. And he's just a well-followed individual who really likes sharing information. And it's not for organizational gain, he just enjoys doing it personally. The next concept is of translational teachers. So there'll be someone in your organization or your department who's very good at sharing information in different formats. And the big example, or the big thing at the moment, is infographics. So you'll have seen these all over the place. These are a way of digesting bits of data down into formats that are visually appealing. And the translational teacher are people who take information in one format, put it into another so that others can read it or share it more easily. There is a catch to this. There is a danger that people will only use the infographic, and you really do need to read the source material, but it's very good for getting people interested in the first place. And then the last concept is an interactive investigator. So these are people who are interested in developing new policies. They write the guidelines, they write the evidence, they write the research, and then they share that in different formats. So instead of just putting the paper out there and hoping other people read it, when they release their paper, they'll also do a podcast. They'll get someone to interview about why it's important. They'll do a YouTube video. They'll write an infographic. They'll do all these things. So simultaneously, there's lots of different formats, lots of different ways of sharing the same information. And that produces a better quality, I think, of either presentation or report style. So I'm involved in a website called Don't Forget Bubbles. And one of the things that we've been involved in is not only using a website to transfer information. We have a conference each year, and we invite people to come to that conference and do an 18-minute presentation on something that they think would interest the wider kind of medical community. And one of the professors who came to that, amazingly intelligent guy, really good and knew his stuff. But what we were able to help him with was his presentation style. So don't worry about the content of this, just look at the slide. So this was his original slide in terms of giving a lot of text, a lot of numbers. It was about the way that two different studies worked in two different areas. And we were able to work with him to produce this slide. And I think even if you don't understand the content behind it, you'll see it's much clearer that there's two things being compared here, and that the CT rate, this is computerized tomography, or an enhanced X-ray, is different in these two sites. And this is one of the great things about social media. It encourages people to look again at the way they share information. People do have shorter attention spans now, and you need to be able to engage people more rapidly. And social media, not just through Twitter, just through being able to look through things through a different lens, because you need to think about how things are going to come across through your blog site, through your presentation. How will this be shared? Because people sit in conferences and workshops now, they'll take pictures of your slides, they may share them on Twitter, they may talk about them on web channels. So you need to be really in control of your message, and that message needs to be crystal clear. And so that more and more research studies in medicine now are using Twitter to highlight to people how their studies are going and being able to improve recruitment through that particular methodology. So as I kind of draw to a close, the argument that I've tried to put forward is amongst three domains. That the lots of people now are using or access information in different ways, so that they will either read things on a blog, or they'll read it on Twitter, or they'll want to listen it onto the way to work, or they'll read it audio visually on YouTube. And social media allows you to cater for those people. It enables you to form communities of practice, these large learning networks where information can be shared rapidly, and that we can scale up, we can reach our endpoint, we can close this knowledge translation gap from where things are evidence and policy based, and we can get people using them in personal practice. And that's where I really see the benefits of social media lying. Now, there are challenges. So people asking, well, Damien, how is it that you spend so much time on social media? And my immediate response is, well, how do you know if I'm spending so much time on Twitter if you're not on Twitter yourself? And some people kind of have an awkward laugh about that. But it is true that I do spend time on social media, but I see that as giving me time back. Now, there was an initial investment. This isn't something that you can go away after this presentation and go, I'm just going to go on Twitter, I'm going to learn loads of stuff and it will improve my life. That's just not going to happen. Sometimes these networks take years to build. You are going to have to sacrifice something to be able to develop your new network, and time is important. And I think work-life balance is a dreadful term. I think that what we need to be thinking about more is how we regulate everything that we do in our lives, and that our families are important, our personal lives are important, but work is important too. And that there needs to be a way of individuals finding how they balance everything that they do in their lives, so that it is adding value both to them and also the people they work with and the people that they love. So there is a time cost to this. For me, the time cost releases far more time than it does putting in the first place. There is also a danger that social media appears shiny, it appears new, people get taken away by the infographics. They think, oh, I've done this one tweet and it's been retweeted 3 times, so I've reached a bigger audience. That's not the case. Content is king. So yes, you might do this funny cartoon, or you might have been able to encourage people to kind of retweet an infographic, but if they're not reading the primary material, then you're not reaching the audience. So don't get distracted kind of by visuals. So do think about the content that you're trying to share. And then there is also this danger that you get so immersed in stuff that you miss the point. And I think the way people engage in social media is either as an observer, so this is passive, you don't interact with anyone, you just read information and you digest it, or you can be an engager, that's someone who is active in producing content or engaging with others. But there are positive and negative mindsets that you can have. And if you go into this with a positive frame of mind, appreciating the pros and cons, then you are likely to acquire knowledge and you are likely to be able to translate it. But if you have a negative mindset, so let's say you're a bit frustrated, you've had a bad day at work, you need to get something off your chest, then there's a real danger that your interactions won't be helpful, or you'll just get a bit frustrated with the whole thing. And so watch out for that there is an important input and output to this. So one of the dangers is airing your dirty laundry, or that's why I've put the clothes pegs on this slide, is that you get so immersed in a particular kind of community of practice on network that you start having conversations or discussions that you wouldn't normally have with people you don't know, or you'd say things that you certainly wouldn't say face to face. So it's just worth being aware of that. It is a negative attribute to social media. I'm not the type of person who says, oh, everything about it's great. There are challenges, there are individuals who will challenge you, and sometimes negative feedback can be quite hurtful. So you need to be aware of that, and you need to manage how much time that you spend dealing with that and work out if that is right for you or not. But I love this quote that from a conference I went to last year, that there is something about blaming the platform rather than the underlying purpose on it, so that people are no more addicted to the internet than alcoholics are addicted to bottles. And so it's not really that social media, I think, is the problem. It's the personalities that we've created in the 21st century, and sometimes our need for kind of reassurance, or sometimes the anger that people have that they just like to kind of spread out, or the increasing trend for kind of mental health issues to overtake the true purpose of what people are engaging in. And I think I do an increasing amount of work now looking at the impact of social media on mental health, particularly in children. And like all things, it has some really positive things that actually people getting together and sharing information can be quite affirming for them. But unfortunately, there is also kind of cyberbullying and a negative consequence of just spending too much time. So you need to be aware of those things. But my final thought is that you can't really put your head in your sand about this. Social media is out there. There's a real huge superhighway of information, and that by engaging with others, by forming these communities of practice, by sharing information at scale, I think we can really improve ourselves, we can improve our organizations, and certainly we can improve, in my kind of world, the lives of the patients that I see, or maybe in another context, that would be the clients that you see. So I hope you found this particular presentation interesting. It's not going to have answered all your questions, and I'm very happy to take questions via lots of mediums. Contact me on Twitter, contact me via email, and let's keep this conversation going, because I think it's a very important one. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rowland. This was a fascinating conversation. I have one question, and it's a bit personal, so forgive me if it's overstepping. So I'm curious about your own skill acquisition as it pertains to social media. So you mentioned earlier the article that was picked up by Reuters that medical degrees don't teach folks how to tweet. However, you seem like a really great communicator, verbally, visually, in writing via your blog. So how did you gain these skills? Or did you always have them?
So that's interesting. I definitely haven't always had them, because I've had feedback. I think when I was a junior research, people were actually, some of my initial supervisors says, Damien, like I'm worried about the way that you write. I think you sometimes are a bit confused. You use very long-winded sentences. And by being part of a social media community, and actually, and I don't joke, Twitter does force you to think about how you're writing and how you're engaging with people and what your messages are. By watching really good communicators, either on social media or at conferences, try and spread a message, I have improved my own style, certainly my presentation style with the slides I use. I've learned that because on social media, there's a lot of people who talk about the way that you communicate. So I now use very text poor slides and try and get the image to do the message. But I've not always been good at that. I think it's been a long-term journey over the last 5 years or so. And I think social media has been the thing that has really helped me improve my skills in that regard.
Interesting. Thank you. Another point that you made was, even if you're getting a lot of tweets or retweets or like followers or likes or however people show that they've taken an interest in your social media post, you might not be sharing the underlying point effectively, or like the bigger knowledge. So can you speak just a little bit more about that? How do you know if people aren't understanding?
So, I mean, some of it's quite useful, because you'll either, it'll get no traction at all. So you work out by watching what other people do that gets picked up, and what stuff that you do that doesn't, what works and what doesn't work. And so if nothing gets picked up, you think, oh, what was going wrong there? The big problem is what you soon also realize that some stuff gets shared massively because it's it's an easy thing to share, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that has reached the end user. I'm afraid I don't have the actual website to hand, but there was a charity who paid a large amount of money for a 30-second advert to go on their website, and it was to raise money for a particular initiative. I mean, in 24 hours, their website had 4.5 million hits because this thing became so viral, and they raised $150.
Oh.
Because people were so impressed with it was really good to click on, but it didn't inspire anyone to actually be part of the charity. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem, is it's too easy now on social media to share information, but actually the core content be lost. And so I particularly find that with it. So if I'm sharing research, so I could share my study, people might be interested in the headline, but they never read the journal article itself. And I think it's a community of practice discussing those things. That's where you get the real traction. So I'd be more impressed with the size of your followership than the actual number of retweets that you're getting, if that makes sense.
Yes, it sure does. And I also appreciate like the multiple modes of communicating your point. So I think you spoke about the digital scholars, the implementers. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think that's an excellent point as well. Well, I won't take up too much more of your time. I wanted to thank you very much, Dr. Rowland, for joining us today, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I understand it's in the evening there, so thank you very much for presenting this all today. And before we close, would you mind going to the next slide, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to invite all of the listeners today to fill out this brief evaluation form. If you have any questions for Dr. Rowland, you can put them in here or via his social media sites. He's happy to receive them. Or thirdly, you can email me directly. It's aoutlaw@air.org, and I'll get these to Dr. Rowland. And so again, I'd like to thank you all for listening to our presentation today. We appreciate the support of NIDLR to carry out today's webcast and all of our center's activities. Thank you very much and have a good day.